Vice President John Tyler became the first person to assume the presidency after the death of his predecessor. And then he proceeded to battle members of his own party in Congress and his cabinet at every turn. I'm Bob Summers, and this is a presidential story. On April 4th, 1841, for the first time in U.S. history, a sitting president died in office. After William Henry Harrison's death, his vice president, John Tyler, assumed the duties of the presidency. That's the way the Constitution was written. The powers and duties of the office of president shall devolve on the vice president. It was vague enough to cause a constitutional crisis. Do the powers and duties of the president fall to the vice president, or does the vice president become the president? His cabinet, actually Harrison's holdover cabinet, called him Vice President acting as president. They were being kind. Others just called him His Excellency. Tyler refused to be a caretaker president. He took the presidential oath of office, assumed the full role of president, and insisted that he be called the president. Letters addressed to the acting president were returned unopened. The precedent of the vice president becoming president stuck until it was codified in the 25th Amendment. Not a bad legacy for the afterthought of Tippecanoe and Tyler too, but according to most scholars, that was the high point of his presidency. At first, Tyler's party, the Whigs, were not bothered that Tyler had assumed the full role of the president. Tyler even delivered an inaugural address loaded with Whig ideals. They were soon disappointed, especially the leader of the Whig Party, former Speaker of the House and current Senator from Kentucky, Henry Clay. Clay had appointed to Harrison's cabinet members loyal to him. In order to be respectful of Harrison's memory, Tyler retained the entire cabinet, including several jealous Whigs who openly ceded that Tyler's takeover. Just as Clay was the power behind the Harrison throne, he assumed Tyler would allow the same. Clay was mistaken. Tyler was told that Harrison had let major policy decisions be resolved by cabinet vote. To be fair, Tyler would also have one vote. Tyler didn't think it was fair and refused. He told his cabinet, "I beg your pardon, gentlemen. I am very glad to have in my cabinet such able statesmen as you have proved yourselves to be, and I shall be pleased to avail myself of your counsel and advice. But I can never consent to being dictated to as to what I shall or shall not do. I, as president, shall be responsible for my administration. I shall be glad to have you with me. When you think otherwise, your resignations will be accepted." Clay, who had unsuccessfully sought the presidency on several occasions himself, was furious. The new president had no allies in his own cabinet. Tyler's Burning Bridges tour continued with Congress. Within weeks, relations between the Whig-controlled Congress and Tyler descended to mutual loathing. A bill resurrecting the Bank of the United States was sent to Tyler's desk for his signature. He was a strong believer in states' rights, so Tyler questioned the constitutionality of a federal government to operate such an institution in a state that might not want it there. His cabinet urged him to sign it. Instead, Tyler used his veto power, not only because Tyler thought that the bill was unconstitutional, but also because he viewed the struggle over the national bank as a personal struggle between himself and Clay, with control of the country at stake. In reaction to the veto, numerous Whigs and Whig newspapers denounced Tyler. That evening, angry supporters of the bank gathered outside the executive mansion, shouting, "Groans for the traitor!" These rioters hurled stones at the residents and shot guns into the air. Then, they burned an effigy of Tyler. The protest was the most violent demonstration ever held near the mansion. In its aftermath, the District of Columbia created its own police force. Tyler's cabinet crafted a compromise bill with language they hoped would appease the president. But somewhere along the line, the final language that Congress passed had been changed way too much. Tyler vetoed that one as well. Clay and the rest of the Whig leadership were furious. After the second bank veto, each member of Tyler's cabinet entered his office, one by one, and resigned. This move, orchestrated by Clay, was intended to force Tyler to resign so Senate President pro tem Samuel Southard next in the order of succession at the time, and a lieutenant of Clay's, would become the next president. There was one exception: Secretary of State Daniel Webster. Webster was in the middle of negotiations on a treaty with the British North American colonies, the regions that would later become Canada, that would resolve several border disputes at the time. When Webster informed Tyler that he would not resign, Tyler responded, "Give me your hand on that, and now I will say to you that Henry Clay is a doomed man." 2 days later, when Tyler refused to resign, congressional Whigs denounced the president as a traitor and expelled him from the party in a declaration published in newspapers nationwide. Tyler was a man without a party. Tyler's relationship with Congress was so toxic that they even refused to allocate funds to fix the executive mansion, which had fallen into disrepair. A year later, Tyler and Congress once again butted heads. The government faced a growing budget deficit and needed to raise funds. Congress passed a couple of bills that would raise tariffs, and Tyler vetoed them both. Once again, Congress was outraged, but they did not have the votes to override the vetoes. But the Whigs did have one more card to play: impeachment. The Whigs in the House of Representatives initiated the first impeachment proceeding against the president in American history. The Whig Party's drive for impeachment was motivated by more than the difference of opinion over tariffs. Tyler's actions violated the Whig concept of the presidency itself, as party leaders believed the president should be deferential to Congress in regards to legislation and domestic policy. This view was at least partially rooted in how previous presidents had acted. Until the presidency of the Whigs' nemesis Andrew Jackson, presidents had rarely vetoed bills, and when they did, it was on the grounds that the bill was unconstitutional. In July 1842, Representative John Botts of Virginia introduced an impeachment resolution accusing Tyler of being utterly unworthy and unfit to have the destinies of this nation in his hands. Of all people, it was Senator Clay who found this measure prematurely aggressive, favoring a more moderate progression towards Tyler's inevitable impeachment. The Botts resolution was tabled until the following January before it was rejected. Despite the rejection of the Botts resolution, the House approved a Whig-dominated 9-member investigative committee headed by former President John Quincy Adams. In the end, the committee published a report that did not formally recommend impeachment, but declared Tyler engaged in a gross abuse of constitutional power. Based on this report, Tyler was censured by the committee, but a resolution for Tyler's impeachment never came to a vote. In response to this criticism, Tyler submitted an official protest, which the House refused to recognize. Adams also sponsored a constitutional amendment to lower Congress's threshold to override a veto from 2/3 of the members in each chamber to 1/2. Neither the House nor the Senate passed the measure. Expelled by the Whigs, Tyler attempted to return to the Democratic Party, from which he had defected 6 years before becoming Harrison's running mate. They were not interested. So without a party, Tyler attempted to form a third party for his re-election bid. When this failed, he dropped out of the 1844 presidential election. Although Tyler could not set domestic policy, he demonstrated that a president willing to execute his constitutional powers could block a congressional majority from doing so as well. After 2 years of a lame duck Congress, on Tyler's last full day in office, he vetoed another bill. This minor bill required legislative approval before federal money could be spent to build revenue cutter ships, predecessors to the U.S. Coast Guard. As a final parting shot to Tyler, Congress finally overrode his veto. This marked the first time in U.S. history that a presidential veto had been overwritten. Thanks for watching.